taught world religions class on this beautiful Sunday morning. Just keeps teasing us with this summer weather. So hopefully that's what's keeping everybody out there enjoying their coffee on their porches and things in this nice sunny weather. So today we are going to continue our conversation about emotional intelligence, and I titled it Spiritual Development. I really should have titled it in Spiritual Intelligence. The more I got into the material. So last week we talked about just what we call general intelligence, or IQ, and that's just our ability to learn and understand reason, the skilled use of reason, and applying knowledge to our environment. And that's the one that we're most familiar with hearing about, is just a standard IQ that is measured through standardized testing. And we talked about the fact that the way those tests are developed, because they are compared against age group, no matter what age group you're in when you take that test, it's compared against the age group, that those scores tend to stay fairly stable throughout your life. They can change, but usually not by drastic means. Sorry, the table just tilted very suspiciously. So, trying to make sure I don't end up with coffee in my lap, everyone. Then last week we spent most of our time talking about emotional intelligence, or what's termed like the EQ, and that's our capacity to be aware of, control, and express our emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. So we talked about the fact that this is different than the IQ score, because emotional intelligence, there's some definite skills that can be practiced and learned, and we can improve our emotional intelligence throughout our life. Then we briefly talked about spiritual intelligence being that higher dimension of intelligence beyond the ego, with access to advanced capabilities of the true self. And that the IQ is seen as kind of a left brain serial processing center. So it likes to deal with tasks one at a time in a linear fashion. That's what that serial processing means. Our EQ, our emotional intelligence, is more of a parallel processing. So we're taking in a lot of information, and we're looking at a lot of different factors, and doing a lot all at one time. And we can pay attention to one piece of that longer than another. We have a lot of flexibility when you're good with emotional intelligence. You can kind of bring all of that information forward and backward and how you need it. And then the spiritual intelligence that we're going to talk about mostly today is synchronous processing. So it's more using the whole brain. And doing all of those processes, like whatever is needed, and going back and forth even more fluently through using all of the different centers of the brain to process information. And then our math equation was that spiritual intelligence equals your intelligence and emotional intelligence multiplied by presence. Presence, yeah. And so that's where we're going to go today, is the spiritual intelligence piece. And so a lot of this, I looked at a lot of different sources, but one of the big sources was Cindy Wigglesworth's book, SQ21. And so she has designed an assessment tool to assess your spiritual intelligence, to kind of let you know where you're at. I did not find it like a free version of that. It's a paid version of the intelligence assessment, a spiritual intelligence assessment. But there's lots of this other material out there where you can, kind of what it's measuring, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So she talks about spirituality versus spiritual intelligence. And so the definition that I found for spirituality was an innate human need to be connected to something larger than ourselves and something we consider to be divine. Whereas spiritual intelligence, as she defines it, is a set of skills that we develop over time through practice that pushes us beyond the ego and allows a stronger connection to our higher self. So in that, the spirituality would be the desire to be connected, or the need, that push to be connected to something. And our spiritual intelligence would be the set of skills that we start honing through practice so that we can get to that place that we desire to be, is kind of how she puts it into action. And for her, she says that's why, her work with spiritual intelligence is kind of interesting, because she does seminars with like Fortune 500 companies, like these major corporations, and talks about spiritual intelligence and doesn't have everyone leave the room because she talks about it in a way. She says, spiritual intelligence being a set of skills that you develop through practice, then those are the practices that you are employing to get to that desired state of spirituality that you want to be at. So spiritual intelligence in and of itself is not tied to any one belief system or any one dogma, because it's all about what are the skills you're trying, you're improving to get to where you want to be based on your own belief system. And so that's how I was just surprised how much she talks about spiritual connection and connection to a higher source and all of those things. And she keeps getting invited back by major corporations to talk about these things, because what they're learning and what her research shows is that just like emotional intelligence, people who are more connected to their spiritual intelligence are actually, because through these skills, they are, they have better interpersonal skills, so they get along with others much better. They don't let ego get in the way when they're trying to make decisions. They become leaders who can lead a team by looking at like the bigger picture and not getting so focused on the individual day-to-day dramas of things. And so it's an interesting field of exploration. Yeah, Wendy. I remembered to put the microphone out this week.
So basically, by that definition, my father, who was the leader of a satanic cult and had great power, and he was like at the top of spiritual intelligence. He had major spiritual intelligence, right?
Well, I think when we get into the
individuals
in
these definitions,
when we get into the 21 skills that she puts under there, it'll be interesting to see how that measures up, like as we keep going through the material. Because I see where you're going. I was like, Wendy, something's going on. Wendy's like, I can see her. She was like getting real tickled about something. So yeah, we'll see how that holds up, because it really is about, I guess part of me would wonder, was that power from truly feeling a connection to something outside of oneself and a higher purpose, or was it ego driving? And I don't know, because I have no idea what that story is, but I'm just saying, like, that would be my first curiosity, is like, oh, is it ego, or is it truly like a spirituality, higher thought process? Yeah.
So when you look at that, and you look at some of the leaders that we have, that the narcissism in that, I think that I don't think you can really have spiritual intelligence and have that type of narcissism, because it's like you said, it's completely and totally ego driven.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not about connection. It's about, I want you to do what I want you to do, and so I'm going to manipulate you to get what I want.
Yeah, and that is a big caveat of the spiritual intelligence that Cindy talks about in the book, is it is that it pushes beyond ego. Like, the ego has to fall away for you to get to, like, there's a rating. So within the assessment, there's 4 quadrants that you're looking at. There's 21 skills that you're looking at. And then within each of those skills, there's a rating of like 0 to 5. And so a 5 is like self-actualized, like you're at the highest level of that. And then there's levels in between. I didn't get too into that today because since we can't take the assessment also, well, you can. It's like $150 online if you want to take the assessment and get the full report. But you can get an idea of where you might fall in different skills. Yeah.
Okay, so I just something to think about as we're going through this. The Abraham Hicks teachings, which is my doorway into metaphysics, they would say the most important thing is that we feel good, and by connecting with our emotions, we connect to Source, and as a person connected to Source, then we have our greatest value to give to this world. So spirituality would not be determined by how much we are connected to others, but connected to our own knowing. Anita Majani, who crossed over and came back, her same thing was our authentic self that absolutely listens and follows that which is right for us, not what is right for everybody, and connected to everybody. And with Chris Hopkins, her theology talks about God and good are synonymous, that we're all looking for our good, and where we get kind of tripped up in all of that is when we believe that looking for our good is giving everybody else their good. So it actually looks like you're doing major spiritual. I've seen people who, everybody would say, that is a spiritual person, but everything is driven by the role that they're playing in their spiritual journey, in their connection with something. So I don't know, I don't know if you're getting what I'm saying, but how that would mesh with this information, or does it?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. So that's the next thing. So when we think about a spiritual leader, someone that we admire as a spiritual leader, someone that when we hear what they're talking about or we see their actions, we think that is truth. Think about some of the things that you admire about those individuals, or what makes them stand out as an example. I love this, as an example of higher human potential. So what are some descriptors you might use for a person that you view as a spiritual leader?
Oops, it's not on.
Push it up.
Somebody who's authentic.
Authentic? Yeah.
I would say someone who presents something that resonates in me, something that's higher.
Okay. What else? I know there's more.
When you start talking about maturity and so forth, I think about in the Old Testament, I think about Joseph and his growth through his life, and of course in the New Testament it would have to be Jesus, of course. But these people, for me, they stand so high, so far above the usual place that we place the bar, that I had a hard time relating them to everyday life, because we're not all presented with potentially spiritual situations to deal with, like they were. Joseph was in a life-death situation much of his life, and yet he tried to. Jesus himself, death didn't mean anything to him. It was and you don't run into that very often.
So maybe a word you would put there is courageous?
Extremely so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other words that people think of when they think of a good spiritual leader or someone that they really look to?
You won't believe I'm bringing this up, but politically, I think any person who I would want to be the president for, and if half of my fellow Americans were terrified and unhappy with the choices, I wouldn't want to wish that on them, even if I thought the one I thought was great. So, I find myself sharing a sense of compassion with everybody right now because there's so much of that feeling. But anyway, the word that I would love most in a leader would be diplomatic.
Okay.
And someone with integrity.
Oh, good word.
I don't know what word this is, but for a long time I didn't go to any particular church, but I would pick a church and go on Sunday. And what I noticed in every single church, and usually it wasn't the preacher or the leaders, it was an individual in there. There was somebody who was so right for what they were doing that you just looked at it and you knew that they were in heaven, that they were just living a wonderful life connected. And many of them did different things, were totally different because it was different religions.
So somehow like connected, tapped in the flow. Yeah. Like, okay. Good.
A word I would say compassionate,
Compassionate, yeah.
and also self-compassion.
Okay. So let's see how we did. So Cindy polled thousands of people. Oh, sorry, Jerry, I didn't see. Go.
I think we all just need to look inside ourselves. There's within us the truth for us, okay? And when we look outside, we become outside to others, we'll become confused if it's an issue that we think is so important to us that we're trying to find an answer. And so I have just really come to believe that all resonance for me is within me, okay? And maybe that's a selfish way to look at it, but
No, I think us looking at how we value another spiritual leader, it's more that sometimes we don't know where we're trying to go until we see some of that in action, and then it's like, oh, that. Like I want to get closer to that for like inside. I want to be closer to that, not necessarily closer to that person because that person is going to do something spectacular, but they've awakened something inside that makes me know, oh, it's possible to live from a place like that. I also want to be connected in that same way. Yeah, I'll be.
Okay, so once upon a time I was really searching, and I was living in a campground with a bunch of students, and this couple moved in, had 2 little kids, and I had he must have been about 14, 15-month-old. And I would have times where I would have to go borrow a joint from my neighbors to calm down so I wouldn't bring my kid, because it was just me and him all the time. And I watched them, and they were they were living in a 7x15 trailer with a room built on for their stuff. And they were so good with their kids. They had such a gentle spirit. They were so patient. They were so kind. And it drew me. It's like, what have you got? And that was qualities that I really considered was gentle and kind and patient and loving and considerate, and that was what really attracted me to their path.
Nice. All right, so Cindy's, the words that she collected, how did we do? authentic, integrity. Sorry, I did a fancy thing here, but it's doing okay. Calm and peaceful, centered. They have a clear mission, compassionate, loving, courageous, forgiving, generous. They are a teacher, open-minded, open-hearted. Right?
Pretty good.
Yeah, we did pretty good. And she said what this has shown her is that we as humans, we recognize a higher expression when we see one, right? Like we have this idea of what that is inside us. Yeah, Tamara.
So, kind of on what Jerry was saying, you know, when you think about all the holy guru, people who have been considered as large group teachers, they always attract the true ones that I really feel like are real teacher leaders. They attracted people by their magnetism. They weren't aspired. Like one of the biggest characteristics was they weren't aspiring to be teachers, really. They just were because they embodied the love, power, wisdom, and grace of all, like a larger kind of all the whole. And they always tend to make everybody feel all connected and equal, and they don't feel like they're unique. They have a way of themselves and the people around them making everybody feel the oneness that we all, like kind of a mutual respect and love and cohesiveness within whatever they're leading, wherever they're at.
So a human word we might put on that is like humble and centered, and so not you must listen to me because I have the greatest information. Just here, I'm living from this place, and if that resonates with you, like it can resonate with you, it can be for all of you. Yeah.
Or just being.
Just
Yeah.
being, yeah.
And I think that's where it's the difference between the ego-driven and just someone who is that, who has that spiritual intelligence. Because you see people who are really charismatic and who have a following and have people that maybe just incredible. I knew someone who was just sensational in the pulpit. I mean, really made you want to be a better person. And in their personal life, though, they were awful. They were narcissistic and very self-centered and ego-driven. And you watched that just crumble because of that, because too many people around them got hurt. So.
Yeah, and so she talks about, again, wisdom is not on there, yeah. So if maybe that comes in the teacher part, like if they have something to share. And so she said, again, these descriptors, if we look at them, we can't say that these descriptors we couldn't put them on only one set of religious beliefs, right? Like they transcend that, they're beyond. And so she says she really feels like we have a natural spiritual compass operating inside of us, and we're drawn to those fuller expressions, and that's why we tend to look at those other leaders. So the spiritual intelligence part, so like for her assessment and for the spiritual intelligence work that's out there, it's also broken into 4 quadrants, and they should look pretty familiar as we went through our emotional intelligence quadrant. So it's really, if we remember that equation, the emotional intelligence plus spiritual intelligence, or plus our regular intelligence equals spiritual intelligence. So it makes sense that spiritual intelligence is kind of building on the things that we might find in that emotional intelligence. And so we have self or self-awareness, universal awareness, self-mastery, and then social mastery and spiritual presence. Yeah, John?
I have a question on that because it reminds me of Johari's window. Anyways, and one of the parts of Johari's window is there's the part that you're not aware of, which to me is what spiritual growth is about increasing that awareness of who you are beyond what you already are aware of. And I was just wondering, does she address that in some way?
Let's see as we go through, because it's all about gaining awareness and using skills. And so, I think this idea of spiritual intelligence for our spiritual development is that there are some really defined skills that, like, through the research, through things that others have done, they're kind of saying, like, here are 21 skills that if you are at a level 5 on all 21 of these skills, those tend to be people who are operating from that higher connection level and would be people that we are looking to, saying they are living a fuller expression of this human experience. And so it's not like the spiritual intelligence assessment doesn't necessarily, like, she's not trying to measure how connected you are to spirit. She's measuring, do you have the skills, or do you have the awareness that leads to that leads most people to that connection. I hope that made sense.
Like
We'll start.
prerequisites.
Yeah, we'll start going through them. We'll see where we get. So for the self-awareness, so the first one is awareness of your own worldview. So, like, do you have an understanding of what filters you view the world through? Do you have a recognition that the way you see things is not simply the way they are? It's your particular framework of beliefs and ideas through which you're interpreting the world around you. Like, do you have a good grasp of that? That's a skill. Awareness of life purpose. Like, do you have a strong feeling of why I'm here, what life's purpose is, that there's some kind of a mission, vocation, calling, some function you're here to serve. And that, again, leaves it open to, that's coming through your experience and your belief system. So that could be different for different individuals, how they view that mission, purpose, those words. Awareness of values hierarchy. So she talks about how will you choose your priorities, and it's the values that we've chosen and not passively received that stabilize us and enable us to stay on course. And so she talks a lot about in this work, when she's talking to people about their values and just like, what are your values? And they start naming things, that she really has them explore, because there's left the whole coaching side to her business as well. And so she has them explore, so is that a value that you chose for yourself, or is that something you passively received through your upbringing and through, so she really has them explore, does that come from where you are now, or does that come from someone told you that's what you're supposed to value? And then she also challenges them, she says, like, she'll have someone say, oh, I value family above all else. And then she starts talking to them, and they're like, I work 70 hours a week, and I had to miss all my son's baseball games last month because I had this big project I was working on and whatever. And she's like, okay, so that's an aspirational value, not a lived value. So it's something that you definitely have in your mind, like, I want to value family above all else. But if you're not living from that place, then you're not prioritizing it in your hierarchy.
Does she have a list of values?
She has a list she uses to, like, help people generate ideas of their values. I didn't put it in here, but, because she says that's sometimes hard for people when you just say, list your top 5 values, and they're like, ah. And so she gives them, like, a list of, here's some things that people commonly
Is that in the book?
I believe, I've read so much, like, there was the book stuff, and then I read so much online and watched so many of her videos that my brain can't separate what I've learned.
Well, I know we were talking about this, I was talking about this with Rachel, and she said that she had a list of like 138 values, and she was coaching with someone, or being coached or something, And she said they got it down to 50, and then they got it down to 25, and then they got it down to 5. And she said she cried for a week while she was doing it because it was so hard to do that. And I know I've kind of looked at this before because I went through the SQ21. But I'm looking for a list of values and trying to figure out, and I may have one somewhere, but that can be a really tricky thing to try and figure out what they really are, because like you say, there are some that you aspire to, but you're not living, and that makes a whole lot of difference in your life.
Yeah.
It's very unbalanced not to have that across the board.
Yeah.
I'd like to interject the idea of sensitivity. The people who seem to see in greater depth, I've noticed are people who are sensitive to the atmosphere, sensitive to the spirit of the place, the situation, the ambiance of where they find themselves, and can pick up spiritual ideas that are floating around out there, but we sometimes don't see them. So I think intuition probably is a piece of this that we haven't talked about yet.
Okay. So the complexity of inner thought is that we're able to consider multiple points of view in our decision making and understand that right and wrong are not simple matters. And she uses the words right and wrong. But one of her examples in that is that, there are people throughout history who we would consider spiritual leaders and or just great leaders who came to a crossroads where a choice was made to go against whatever the conventional belief was, or potentially even go against something that had been set in law, because they came to have an understanding that the true choice, the connected choice, the higher self choice, was to go against that. And so she, people like Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi, and like there was some, if they had followed the laws of the time, or if they had followed what people around them would have said was right, then they wouldn't have done what they did, and they wouldn't have become the leaders and the teachers that they were. And so she's like, that's the complexity of inner thought, is being able to come to that place where decisions are made from that place and not from this external right and wrong framework. And that we recognize the elements of truth in conflicting points of view, and we start enjoying exploring those paradoxes and mysteries, like that we don't see things in black and white, and we really explore where that takes us. John, did you have something?
Yeah, on the awareness of values hierarchy, to me it's not like a one and done thing that you like go through and
Right.
It's just if you are just regularly aware of, is my behavior value driven?
Mm-hmm.
I think is just a good practice. The second thing is complexity of inner thought. When I read that initially, I just go, no, simplicity
Yeah.
of inner thought.
Yeah, I hear you.
We went through a class where Sue had that big list of values, and we figured out which were our top 5 values, so I know that she has that.
Something just dawned on me here. One of the major things that we all fail to recognize and try to attack the problem from that specific location is the forgetting. We came here forgetting who we are to find ourselves in our life and so I I think that the forgetting causes us a lot of different issues. Now, see, Christ, Buddha, Krishna, they did not have the forgetting. They came here as instruments to help us recognize this forgetting that we're in. Okay, they did not have that. And so, in a sense, they were special, but they were God's grace to us to let us all know we would never be forgotten. And that their job was to help us understand the forgetting. Because we're infinite. All the answers are in each and every one of us. All of us are specific to a particular location in life. All of you, we all had an agreement. All of us here. This is why we see each other. And so maybe it's just dawned on me that this forgetting is such an issue. It's just such an issue.
And so I think what Cindy might say to that is that, so this framework of skills is she's saying, like, these are the skills that if we build these back up, they help us remember. And so it puts us on a path of remembrance, of remembering that higher connection, remembering who we are at the core of ourselves.
Thank you for letting us talk. It's kind of hard to keep a cohesive lesson that we prepared with all this kind of back and forth. But leaders, I was thinking when you said the people who broke out of social mores or laws or whatever because it just didn't feel right to them. There's something about the leaders who just are driven by their internal higher self, if you want to put words to it, and people who are driven by more earth power or personality stuff. And often those people who, like Mahatma Gandhi and those types, ended up doing what they did because of people who were in power positions that were not using their leadership maybe from a different place that was everybody benefited the most from.
Yeah. And so the last one here on this self-awareness is having an awareness that both of these parts of us exist, our ego self and our higher self, and they both influence behavior, and embracing the knowledge, or embracing the fact that there's knowledge to be gained from both. And so we talk about that in Unity. I know I've done other classes on like shadow self and that kind of thing. And so we understand that, again, we're not going to label anything as good or bad, right or wrong, right? Because it's all good, all working towards our higher self. And so if we believe that, then the ego also has a function to serve and it's just, what she's saying is that we have to gain clarity regarding which voice we're listening to, and whether or not it's beneficial to listen to that ego voice, and that most of the time we're living from that voice of the higher self or voice of clarity. There's lots of different words you could use there. So the next one is universal awareness. And so this is awareness of interconnectedness of all life. So not necessarily, there was some connection talk. And so what she talks about is that we just have an understanding that the everyday choices that we make, the actions that we take, could and will have impact on people and places that we may never meet and never know. Like, we can't, in our human existence, we may not understand the full ripple of our actions and behaviors and thoughts. But that we have an understanding, like we have an understanding that that is in action, that is a universal law in action. And that we do belong to the universe, that we are embedded in a larger whole. The awareness of worldviews of others is just knowing that just as we have our worldview, every other person has the same, and having an awareness and an understanding and appreciation that we're all coming from different points of experience. The breadth of time and perception. So this is that thinking big, seeing the bigger context. And so she talks about, we talked a little bit last week about things that we sometimes have a hard time understanding of how it's for the greater good or where it's coming from. And so she talks about it in this idea of breadth of time perception. And so if we are looking at this one human lifetime and the things that are happening within this one human lifetime, it may be difficult to understand certain actions because our emotions are more tied to it, we're closer to that or whatever. But in the breadth of time perception, if we're looking at 1,000-year span, and we take this one action that happened today relative to a 1,000-year timeline, do we see it differently? And so that's the breadth of time perception. Like, do you have the ability to come from that place of understanding, that acknowledging that it might be hard in this human experience right now, but that in the big picture, in this perception of time and space, it's a far different view. Awareness of limitations of the power of human perception. So she, says the Buddha said, where there is perception, there is deception. So understanding that there's things that we're not able to perceive with our five senses. Like, we come into this human experience with a strong set of five senses. We can argue that there's other senses at play that we just don't. We haven't honed the skills. Some people, that's maybe what you're talking about. Some people have more than five senses at play, or they've practiced those skills. Maybe they came into this life with more innate ability in those areas. But just the understanding that there may be things that we cannot see and we cannot understand in this human experience, but we can still understand that they exist, and that we always have to take that into account. The awareness of spiritual laws. So she calls this an inquiry into an awareness of how things ultimately work. And so she, again, talks about spiritual laws or laws of the universe. You can put that on a lot of different frameworks, and people see that differently based on their religious framework and their worldview that they're looking through. But if we look across teachings and across history, we see those common themes, right, that point to the fact that there are spiritual and universal laws at play within our existence. And then experience of transcendent oneness. So awakening to the discovery that you're one with all. And she talks about, these are the moments when spirit breaks through this veil of ordinary consciousness, and we're seeing through the appearance of separation and recognizing the unity that lies beneath. And we've talked about this a lot in other things, and Sue's talked about it a lot. Sometimes that's 1 second, like 1 second of time, you go, and then it's gone. It might be that you spend a whole 15-minute meditation in that. It may be that you have practiced this enough that you're walking through your day and you're feeling this almost always. Like, we're all at different levels of that transcendent oneness. And she's saying, again, if you're looking at that scale of 0 to 5, people who are at a 5 are walking through their day feeling that more often than not. Yeah.
I don't know if it was her, but somebody was saying the first time that they experienced that oneness was at a baseball game, and they said that's the addiction of baseball, is when you've got bases loaded and you got a batter up and you got two outs, and this batter hits a ball and you're waiting to see and it's going in the outfield. Everybody in the whole stadium is like holding their breath. And so there's that feeling of stillness and connectedness. And she said that was the first time she'd ever experienced it. And that was, and then you begin to notice other times. But she said that was the draw for baseball, was that 1 millisecond kind of thing when everybody's holding their breath, sitting on the edge of the seat waiting to happen. And sometimes that can happen in a symphony, or at a concert or different places, but it's that one, and everybody is like on board. And then you begin to realize this can happen other places.
Next,
Analogy.
yeah.
Like watching somebody propose in public, and everybody's watching and just holding their breath, waiting to see if they're going to say yes. That's a great analogy. Huh.
So, a lot of these ideas, to me, don't seem like they would apply to all kinds of different spiritual beliefs. They seem very metaphysical, right? Yeah, these resonate with those of us who study metaphysics, because a lot of churches aren't about oneness. They're not about becoming one. They're about, we're the only true. This is, and maybe people of a certain, I am not a scholar of Judaism, but I know that there's a lot of what is part of their theology is a separatism. They're separate from others, and so I guess I have a hard time taking these and applying them to the concept of every religion is doing this. They wouldn't use these. Many of them wouldn't. The one I came from wouldn't use these. And like I say, the Jews wouldn't. I know the Mennonites and all of those kinds would not use these. That is just a comment. That's why it doesn't make sense to me.
And I also don't profess to know the inner workings of all of those religions either. When I say that from Cindy's point of view, she is saying that she has been in groups with people from all different religions and all different belief systems, and something within this spiritual intelligence work has resonated with all of them. So maybe not all pieces, but there was some value for all of them. She's gotten that feedback, and hasn't had any one religion just come and be like, this is hogwash. you're blasphemous, So that's where she's saying it has functioned when she's talking to people from lots of different belief systems. But I get what you're saying, and I recognize that this all makes a lot of sense from my worldview, right? Like that's why I gravitated towards it. It makes sense to me through my worldview, and part of that is being a student of Unity. So, yeah, I'll be.
I think part of it is looking back to the core essence of the beginning of because the Jews were not supposed to be separate. They were supposed to be separate so that they kept their beliefs, but they were supposed to share their beliefs and proselyte and convert other people. So their reason for being separate was so that core belief would be held intact so that they could share it. And I know, Christianity began to be the same way. It was supposed to be shared because, and the Avatar course is the same way. When you take the Avatar course, you can't share the exercises because it's a sacred thing. And once you share it and people start pulling it apart, then it loses its sacred and it loses its power. That's the same thing with some of the shamans. When they use mushrooms, it's a sacred thing, but when everybody starts playing with mushrooms, it loses its sacredness. And so when you look at the essence of the beginning of all the religions, they had that, this is so wonderful, we want to keep it intact so that we can share it for the greater good. But once it gets out there, people start distorting it. And so we're looking at all the distortions. We're not looking at the essence of where it started. So this is going back to the essence, and so it would resonate with anyone who is looking for that essence.
I would posit that Judaism is not homogeneous at all. nor mainline Christianity either. And that's mine.
Yeah, okay. So we're gonna move on to higher self-ego mastery. So this, she talks about commitment to spiritual growth, and so that's demonstrated through action. And she actually talks in the book, one of her stories is a student of Unity who scored at a 0 on commitment to spiritual growth and was really upset by that. And one of the pieces, which I thought, so when you take the full assessment apparently, one of the pieces in that commitment to spiritual growth that was the reason for that person scoring 0 is that a commitment to spiritual growth encompasses like resolving your issues with your past programming. And so there's questions that ask things like, you know, do you ever study and look to materials or people from the programming you came from in life to grow spiritually? And if you say no to all of those questions that kind of reference, it kind of indicates that you haven't resolved, that there's like a mental block, that you're like, nope, that was all junk, and I'm not listening to that anymore. And she's like, a true commitment to spiritual growth is understanding that all of those things are valuable, and so you could go back to teachings from that original belief system, and you could find value in that in some way. And so, like when the assessment indicates that there's a super resistance to learning from that place, then it scores you really low on commitment to spiritual growth. And she said this person was like, I have been a teacher or a student of Unity for 25 years, and I do all the work, and I meditate every day, and I do all this. And she was like, and that's wonderful. And have you resolved your issues with your with what was before Unity? And she said through their conversations, this person was like, you're right, I haven't. I just put up a wall and said, I'm never going there again. I'm not going to think about it, talk about it, look at it. I'm not going to find value in anybody who's thinking about it, looking at it, and talking about it. And so she's like, you know, she gained through their work then moving forward. She then like came back after some time and was like, wow, like after that, like my brain exploded, and now I understand. I thought I was coming from a place of being spiritually centered, and I thought I had done all this growth, and now I realize that I wasn't nearly as far along as I thought I was. You know, like I think we've all maybe been at that spot before where something pops up and you're like, man, I really thought I was farther along than this, and not that that's a bad thing, just that we sometimes lose our own awareness. Yeah, Wendy.
Well, I have to say that, you know, even though I am doing spiritual work and actually am doing spiritual dream work where I'm spending time with my biological father and getting to remember who he is, I really can't think of much of that spiritual, and you would consider very spiritual, abusing children and hurting people and having power over, and I can't think of that it would be to my advantage or anyone around me's advantage for me to embrace any part of that. So I don't think that's necessarily true.
So I took it as more that idea, the way that I interpreted what she was talking about is more about like the non-resistance. Just the fact that you're not fighting against it anymore, that you've released it, you've forgiven it, you've made your peace with it, instead of it being what does Michael Singer talk about? Like the thorn that you've just wrapped up in lots of cushy layers so that nobody can bump against it. Like that's different than actually removing the thorn and going, oh yeah, that was an interesting thorn. And I'm not keeping it harbored in my body anymore.
So then with that, so then I would say, when my second son passed when he was 19, and he came back, and basically, I was beginning to start a war with those people that had hurt him and hurt others. Okay. And he came back and he said, Mom, it's a waste of your life to do this. It's a waste of your life. Only the love goes on. Nothing else matters. And it's a waste of your life. So I took all of my evidence and I took all of my stuff and I had a big bonfire. To me, that would be more of that, but I can't see ever going in there and saying, I want to incorporate any of that into my life.
No, I don't think it's about incorporating it. I think it's about maybe acknowledging it's part of your experience and not being, what's the right word? Really just that, like I said, the non-resistance or the letting go of it as bad or wrong, just like, okay, that is what was, but here's the truth of what I know. And that's more valuable to me to move through life with that, but I can acknowledge. And so I guess that's what she was talking about with this person, is they had really, like, there was a lot of resistance tied up in that religious experience that they had come from earlier on. And so it was putting a roadblock to true spiritual growth, because that thorn was still festering somewhere within her.
Yeah, I think you just said it, that when you block something, you block more than just what it is that you intention to block.
I love you people, and I love this class. This is, I love it. I love it. Thank you all for being so phenomenal.
And I think I hear everybody, kind of, to me, the root of this piece of the conversation is that, and you talked about Michael Singer, one of his cores is just, whether it's past or future, and it's not about living in a consciousness that's fully embracing life as it's unfolding right now in front of you, it's like an anchored baggage, So whether you love it or whether you hate it, or whatever, if you're present is hanging on to something from I'm not sure I can put this into words, but the image I had of that is, it's not about whether you're accepting and embracing it or not, it's about, I had a friend who would say, face it, embrace it, erase it. So it's like if you feel something has a charge or something that had any kind of effect over you, and for me that's sometimes good or bad, if it's either way, anyway, if you take it out and you let yourself feel that fully and go into it, if it's been most people don't think about also the good times, but really bad or good kind of things, if you come out and there's something about identifying with it, that's what I'm trying to say. If you're still identifying in the present with something that was your past, it's still there having a hold on the free flow present beingness. And then when you get to these kind of things, verbiage eludes actually being able to.
I feel that, Tamara. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I just made any sense, but in my brain, that was like putting all these connections together, but it may have sounded crazy.
A couple of, maybe a month ago, I was watching a YouTube video about Regina Dawn Akers. This lady was interviewing her and talking about the higher self and the ego, and I took the edging God out is becoming more known into new thought circles now. And I think we are awakening to a new way of spirituality.
That's nice. So running through we're running out of time. So keeping our higher self in charge, living your purpose and values, sustaining your faith, seeking guidance from higher power or higher self. Those are all things in that ego mastery part. And then our social mastery or spiritual presence. So a wise and effective spiritual teacher or mentor. So these are things that, like, if you're in that social mastery, spiritual presence, these are things that you may be experiencing, or it still is in that skill thing. So she's saying that you might be assisting others in activating their inner learner. You're remaining curious and interested in learning more. You're being the change that you and others desire to experience in the world. So it's not that you actively go out and say, I am a spiritual teacher and mentor. It's what Tamara was talking about. Just in your being, because you're living from that place, others start going, hey, what do you have that I don't have? And talk to me about that. And maybe they're coming to you curious. A wise and effective change agent. So you can navigate smoothly through changes. You can be the catalyst for growth. Just because you're making decisions and moving through life from that higher dimension. You make compassionate and wise decisions. You're a calming and healing presence. So, I love that she defined that as your higher self is noticeably in charge to others. And I thought that's really cool. And when I think about people who are calm and healing presence in my life, and I say, oh, their higher self is noticeably in charge to me, that makes sense for me to say it that way. And then being aligned with the ebb and flow of life. So you're moving with the flow of the life process to draw on inner intuition. There's your intuition, Dawn. Sensitivity to the human body and awareness of the world around. You recognize the difference between blessings and distractions. And you can appreciate the wisdom of synchronicity. And then she teaches her 9 steps to shift to higher self. And this is just an exercise that she has used for herself and she uses for others. And she calls it spiritual weightlifting. And so she's like, anytime that we're using our practice, so that could be meditation, engaging in learning, uplifting reading, contemplation, surrounding yourself with others who are building skills or possess the skills that you value. All of those things, she calls that spiritual weightlifting. So we're exercising those muscles. We're having our brain and our body and our human experience live from that place, even if it's for short bursts of time. And she's like, what do we know about weightlifting? That there's even value in short bursts of time, right? You don't have to do a 1-hour workout to get benefits. You can do 25-minute workouts or whatever and get the same results. And so this is just her, when she's having an issue where she wants to step into higher self, and this is what she teaches, is to stop, breathe, ask for help, and that's the spiritual asking for help, being open to what messages, what guidance may come. Observe yourself, so making yourself the observer of the moment instead of being in the moment. Identifying and embrace any ego concerns, and that's where that skill of recognizing what's ego voice and higher self voice comes in. Reframe the situation, focus on something to be grateful for, and then choose a spiritually intelligent response. And that's just, I don't know that she uses the exact words, but as I was reading it too, it's kind of like bring yourself to the present moment, bring yourself to the now moment, like what is actually true and happening in this moment, and what guidance am I receiving to move forward in life. All right, that felt like a lot today, and but I do so appreciate this class has so much value for me that we all come together and share ideas like this and have stories, and I know I always leave just with all sorts of curiosity about other things, and anyway, I hope that that's the same for everyone online and here in person. But that's my appreciation, that's my gratitude for this experience and this group of people. Thank you. So our announcements. We will have meditation tonight at 6 o'clock. That's open to everyone. Thursday's chair yoga is canceled this week. It will resume the following Thursday at 9 a.m. Next Sunday, the New Thought World Religion class, Paul Day is going to begin a 3-part series on the book, The Lost Gospel of Q, the original sayings of Jesus. We will have a celebration of life for Al on April 27th at 2 p.m. And then there will be a snack potluck in Fellowship Hall after. Also on the 27th, John Rust is hosting a Saturday evening outdoor jam at 7 p.m. Bring your lawn chair. And they're planning to build a bonfire and listen to some live music on our outdoor stage. If you would like to attract more abundance effortlessly and create the life of your dreams, Prosperity Plus 3 is the 7-week class starting May 19th. That's going to be on Sundays from 1 to 2:30, and I am facilitating that. It is so I say facilitating because the course is videos from Mary Morrissey, and so we watch those together and go through workbooks and do activities together, but she is the instructor of that course. We need you to register in the foyer. Registration is going to close May 5th, and the cost of this materials is around $60. The Ladies of Unity Banquet is May 10th at 7 o'clock. The theme is the many hats we wear. There's going to be a hat contest, some powerful guest speakers, empowering music, all the fun. Seating is limited, so please RSVP on the website, and you're asked to bring a side dish or dessert. Teresa Amezpa is participating in Walk for the World. I believe that is next Sunday, and she would love to see a Unity presence at that.
What is it?
Walk for the World. She's going to talk more about it in service today, and then there's some information on the connection group about it as well. I don't want to misspeak on the details. And then right after service today, we're clearing the chairs from the sanctuary and unloading the pod. So if you can help, stay and help. We're going to order pizza for volunteers and bring everything inside and get ready for Planet Unity next week. It's here. It's already here. And we can use all the help we can get unloading the pod and organizing yard sale stuff this week. So thank you all.
Yay, Amy.